November 321 Bravo Alpha, a late model Cessna Caravan 208EX, was lost from radar contact yesterday on a routine flight from Unalakleet, Alaska, back to its home base in Nome, Alaska. This aircraft is owned and operated by Bering Air, a scheduled airline service and Part 135 operator out of Nome. Here's what we know so far. On board the aircraft were 9 passengers and 1 pilot. This is a single pilot operation. According to the FlightAware data, it looks like the aircraft departed Unalakleet and climbed right on up to a cruise altitude of 8,000 feet and then began their descent into Nome with a ground speed initially of about 180 miles per hour, descending down to 3,400 feet, with the ground speed dropping down to the last data point, 115 miles per hour. Looking at the granulated ADS-B data, we can see the aircraft begin its descent here at 8,100 feet, a stabilized descent at 400 to 600 feet per minute, with the ground speed decreasing from 184 down to 138, and then the last data point, ground speed down to 115 miles an hour at 3,400 feet, and the rate of descent accelerating to 800 feet per minute. Initial reports are also indicating that the pilot told Anchorage Air Traffic Control that he would begin a holding pattern while he was waiting for the runway to be cleared at Nome. C-130 search and rescue aircraft are looking for the airplane. I believe the Coast Guard C-130 came out of Kodiak, and a Air National Guard C-130 came all the way out from Elmendorf. Both of these bases are nearly 500 miles away, and so far have not been able to find anything. Local air searches have been hampered by the poor visibility. The end of the data on FlightAware puts the aircraft some 38 miles to the east of Nome. Other reports are indicating that the aircraft was within 12 miles of Nome. Initial reports indicating that there was icing in the area, light snow at the Nome airport with a temperature of 14 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a very important accident in Alaska. Alaska is a very tight-knit aviation community. Pretty much everybody who is involved in aviation in Alaska knows everybody else. And Bering Air is one of the top-notch Part 135 and 121 carriers in Alaska. And this represents, I believe, the first hull loss that Bering Air has ever experienced in all these years of flying in Alaska, dating all the way back to the 1970s when they started flying in these dreadful conditions in Alaska. This is also a very important accident to Textron Cessna, as I believe this is the first hull loss of a Cessna 208EX with the TKS known icing system on board the aircraft. Prior to ADS-B data, and I believe still in use today in Alaska, was a system called spider tracks. And these spider tracks may give you even better data today than this ADS-B data. This may be where the Bering Air folks may be able to more closely determine where the last return or location of this aircraft was. And by the way, we can thank the folks in Alaska for providing us this ADS-B data that we use so widely today. ADS-B was developed in Alaska under the Capstone project back around the turn of the century, or the year 2000. There's also radar capability here in Nome, but it's unlikely that that radar is able to look all the way down to the surface of the water, or the solid ice, as may be the case this time of year. Flying in Alaska is a tough single-pilot operation. You're not only just flying the plane, but you are loading and unloading the passengers and the cargo as well, and servicing the aircraft in brutal, brutal conditions. Often these jobs are great time builder jobs for younger pilots, and also you often see a lot of retired airline-type pilots or retired pilots go up there to continue their desire to fly. Bering Air has a fleet of aircraft perfect for the job of this short-haul flying in Alaska, including the Beech 1900, the Beech King Air, the Cessna Caravan, the brand-new Cessna Courier, and a Casa 212, and a couple of helicopters. Now, the Cessna Caravan aircraft at Bering Air have all been upgraded to the latest model Cessna 208EX, which gives them the bigger PT6A-140 engine, bumping the horsepower up from about 675 horsepower to 850 horsepower. But more importantly, that replaces the old pneumatic boot de-icing system of the predecessor models with the new TKS known icing wet wing anti-icing system. These Cessna Caravans also have the latest in avionics, the Garmin G1000 series. TKS uses porous leading edge panels that squirts out an ethyl glycol solution, anti-icing solution, which then rolls back on the rest of the wing to prevent ice from forming in the first place, and is a vast improvement over the old de-ice pneumatic boot system, which was a de-ice system. These boots would inflate and knock the ice off of the aircraft, but these boots would often leave ice behind the boots that it was unable to knock off and allow ice to continue to accrete on the wing. The TKS system consists of these porous leading edges over the leading edges of the flying surfaces of the aircraft, and a couple of pumps and a reservoir to squirt the fluid out of these porous leading edges. And on the Cessna Caravan, you can operate the TKS in normal or high flow, and there's an additional backup pump as well. And of course, the TKS reservoir would have enough TKS fluid in it for the round trip from Nome all the way out to Unalakleet and back. And if needed, I bet the pilots have some additional TKS fluid available for them out there at Unalakleet for safe measure. You do not want to run out of TKS fluid in these icing conditions. And I hear tell that if you're in a desperate situation, ice is accreting faster than the TKS system can keep up, you can put the fluid control on high and hit the backup pump and really squirt at the last of the juice. And the reason icing is so important in these turboprop aircraft is because they're stuck in the icing conditions for so long. As you saw on this flight, even though it was only 150 miles or so, the altitude of the flight was only 7,500 feet. Right smack in the middle of the icing conditions. So some of the things investigators are going to be looking at is the performance of the TKS icing system. Was it able to keep up with the conditions? Also, when you're loading passengers at your turnaround airport, in this place, Unalakleet, is it snowing there? Is ice and snow beginning to accrete onto the top of the wings while you're loading and unloading passengers? Another design feature of the Caravan that investigators will be looking at closely is the ailerons and spoilerons. The flaps on the Caravan are huge. The ailerons are relatively smooth. In order to assist with the rolling of the Caravan and to minimize adverse yaw, Cessna has these spoilerons. So when you bank more than about 5 degrees of bank or so, a spoiler will assist you in lowering the low wing by destroying the lift. In severe icing conditions, this could be a problem, especially if you've got the aircraft hooked up on autopilot and you want to enter a holding pattern, and that autopilot just whacks that aircraft into a 30-degree bank. This could be an issue if the aircraft wing was already heavily iced up. Another thing investigators will be looking at is the proper use of this inertial separator in icing conditions, commonly found on PT6A engines and is on the Cessna Caravan EX. This is a way of preventing solids like ice, or if on a off pavement runway, dirt and rocks, getting ingested into the engine. So in the normal position, this door is closed and the air flows from the inlet into the engine. If you need to activate the bypass of the inertial separator, you mechanically just pull a big lever out on the panel, and that opens this bypass door here, and it moves this aerodynamic shape piece here down further into the intake, causing the sharp bend in the airflow. So theoretically, any solid material like ice would fly out the back of the engine instead of being ingested by the engine. So for example, if you're taking off on a contaminated runway with chunks of ice on it, you would want to have this in the bypassed condition so that the ice, any chunks of ice picked up by the nose gear would be shoved right through or bypassed rather than ingested by the engine. So these are some of the things investigators will be looking for once they have found the aircraft. At the time of this recording, they have not yet found 321 Bravo Alpha. Just a tragic day in Alaska aviation history, the first hull loss for Bering Air and the first loss of the Cessna 208EX model Caravan with TKS anti-icing capability known to date. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks that support this channel on Patreon. See you here.